Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So as it was announced in our newsletter, February is Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. And I was going to speak last year in honor of this month. However, the day I was going to give the Devar Torah happened to be the weekend I had to go out of town because of my father's death. And so in many ways, this Devar Torah I'm giving in his memory for Jonathan Wolf, Yona Moshe ben Pinchas Barachu.
His memory be a blessing.
Judaism is not afraid of questions. In fact, I think we're a little suspicious of answers that come too quickly. Just read the Talmud. We can never have one answer. We have to go through a whole series of answers. And thinking ahead to the Seder is built around disruption. We rearrange the table. We destabilize what feels fixed. We ask why, even when we think we already know the story. So, now that we've read this week's story, I want to do something very simple. Something I learned to do as an educator, and particularly as a trained practitioner in Torah godly play, which I am still waiting to find an opportunity to bring here to OZ. So I'll give you a sample. I invite you, I want us to wonder. I wonder, which part of the story did you like the best? Answer to yourself. You don't have to tell me. Which part of the story is the most important? I wonder, which part of the story was about you? Or maybe, where were you in the story? And finally, I wonder, what part of the story could we leave out and still have all the story that we need? When we think of this parsha, Yitro, I imagine most of us were thinking about the thunder at Sinai, Revelation, 10 Commandments. But as I was studying this week's parsha, I found myself wondering, not about any of these great dramatic moments. I found myself drawn to a conversation, a quiet conversation in a tent. But as we read, our story does not begin there. It opens with a reunion. Yitro brings Moses' family back to him, and the Torah tells us the names of his sons. The first one, Gershom. Ger means stranger, maybe a traveler, sojourner, if you really want to get fancy, but someone who is not quite rooted, someone who may perhaps is just passing through. But then I thought to myself, but in rabbinic Hebrew, we use that same word, ger, to mean someone who has chosen Judaism, a convert, someone who is making a commitment to permanently be a part of the community. So Gershom, stranger, there, Sham being there, that already seems like an oxymoron to me and in conflict. And the other son, Eliezer, Eli, my God, and Ezri is my help. We're talking about God and help, and we talk about stranger. These Moses and Zipporah's sons were not named after victory. They weren't named after a destiny, and they weren't named after a promise from God. Each of their names are the vessel of Moses' lived experience. And I believe that taken together, they are proclaiming something deeper. Wherever I wander, God is with me. So I've learned over the course of my life that I don't always match the picture that people carry in their heads. be it because as a Cantor, I am still fighting with the image of, well, you're not what I think of when I think of what a Cantor looks like. Perhaps not here in Vermont, but in lots of other places in my career. And I've been called a walking contradiction. How am I both so deeply committed to progressivism, but I'm also very traditional? I have been described, in the words of our president, Linda Siegel, as simultaneously the most organized and the most disorganized person she has ever met. It's true, though. I carry with me this conflict every single day. But more importantly, I've learned that sometimes what's exhausting to me and to people like me, it's not who we are, but it's the expectations we are asked to meet. But back to our story. The very next day in our parasha, Moses is working. Moses is sitting, he's ready at work from morning until evening. We're very specific about that in the Torah. I think because the narrator wants us to really feel morning until evening and how long that really is. And the people are standing over him. They are in line. They are impatient. They all want Moshe's attention right here, right now. And he's sitting alone. Now, Yitro is watching and asks Moshe, "Why are you sitting alone? Why are you doing it this way? What are you doing?" Now, if I had heard this said to me, I might have been like, "Oh no, I'm being criticized, what's going on?" But Moses simply answers, "Well, because the people are coming to me to seek God. They have questions. They come, I judge, I teach, and I have to answer these questions. That's that." But Yitro is asking why. And this is the moment where my lens, that only I can bring, and where I look at Torah as someone who is neurodivergent, my little spidey senses started to tingle here, because I recognize this pattern. Yitro is asking, "Why are you doing it this way?" And what I hear is, "Am I in trouble? Is this wrong? Isn't this just how it works? Is this not how everyone does it?" And I will say that the journey for me to finally understand who I am was because I asked questions. I asked, what is wrong with me? Why do I still feel like I don't fit in? I don't belong. Something is not right, but maybe life is just hard. Why is everything harder for me? Because everyone around me would say, "Oh, but you're so smart. You're doing great." Nobody would tell me. No one else could see. So I had to find out the answer for myself. And it was because I started to ask questions that I finally found myself, after many years receiving both an ADHD diagnosis, and then a few years later, I finally received an autism spectrum diagnosis. And particularly, when people ask me, "Well, how did you know?" I was struggling, and I was going through trying to find a home, spiritual home, a community, and everywhere I went, I always got the feeling from people that, "Well, you're not quite right, not quite the right fit," which of course tells me nothing. And one day, I finally said out loud to one of my doctors, Is the problem here that I'm autistic and nobody thought to tell me?" First time I said that out loud. I was quietly, like many people who are seeking their identity, quietly reading and researching and trying to understand and trying to go, "Well, this sort of sounds like it, but I don't know." I'm still not really sure of myself, so I'm asking questions. I'm doing my research. I'm going and going and going. And it was because I asked the question that my doctor said, you got a point there. That's a good thought. That's a good question. Let's investigate. So back to our story, I see Moshe here. Well, maybe Moses didn't hear the question. Maybe he doesn't understand the question. But maybe Moshe just has no idea that there could be another way, that not everybody feels overwhelmed the way he does. But the thing here is that Moshe is so fortunate to have Yitro. I didn't have Yitro to say, hey, whoa. Let's talk about this. Yitro is saying something that maybe on the surface to some of us sounds harsh. It's lo tov. This is not good. This is not a good situation you are in. But more importantly, he doesn't say, you are not good. He doesn't say, you're failing. He doesn't say, you clearly don't have enough experience. He doesn't say, well, it sounds like you have a time management problem. Doesn't say, the people are complaining. Maybe you should be more friendly. Try smiling. He says, lo tov. This structure, this arrangement is not good. And then he follows by saying, navol tibol. Now, the Eitz Chaim translates this as, like, you will surely wear yourself out. Now, I did a little bit more digging because it seemed to really, when you have a word repeated kind of like that, it must mean something more. And I've come to really prefer Rashi's understanding. And Rashi translates that phrase as, you will wither like a leaf, that you will crumble and there will be nothing of you left. Now, to give you a little insight into how my brain works, this is how I went down a little bit of the etymology rabbit hole. I hear withering, I think leaves. Tu B'Shvat was this week, and anyone who saw me knows that I was wearing my photosynthesis skirt. Photosynthesis is a cycle. Well, if you disrupt the cycle, the light is too much or not enough, or the soil is wrong, the plant can't grow. But that's not because the plant had some moral failing. It just withered and it burnt out. And people do too. And Yitro is able to see in this way what others do not, that Moshe is on the edge of burnout. Now, funny enough, burnout as a psychological concept did not really enter the literature until the 1970s. And neurodivergent burnout, mostly experienced by people with ADHD or autism, even that was not widely discussed until much more recently. We're talking during the height of the pandemic. But yet here is Yitro in the desert saying, if you keep doing this, you will wither. Not because you are weak, because the conditions are unsustainable. Again, sometimes what exhausts us is not who we are, it's the expectations we are asked to meet. We are very good at celebrating gifts, and especially when those gifts serve us. We love brilliance, we love talent, competence, we look to people who seem to have it all together and can hold everything at once. But we are less comfortable asking ourselves what it costs someone, perhaps, to keep offering those gifts, especially when they don't look disabled, especially when they don't match that picture in your head of what you think someone who is disabled looks like. Yitro refuses to conflate those. He doesn't gaslight Moses into believing he is failing to meet some invisible standard. He names the system, Lo Tov. And then he builds something different. Yitro advises Moses, gives him structure, points him towards a path of shared responsibility, layers of leadership, structure that allows the burden to be carried together. But most importantly to me, he gives Moses agency to choose who is helping him. Exactly how do I want to implement a new form of order and structure? And I'm reminded of Eliezer, God is my help, and help is not a weakness. Help is a covenantal relationship. And perhaps maybe help was never meant to be exceptional or special, not a special need. It was always meant to be ordinary. Maybe the question for us is not whether we see ourselves in Moses. I usually don't necessarily identify with Moses. I'm much more of a Joshua girl myself. But whether we see ourselves in Moses, but maybe the question is, are we willing to be Yitro? Are we willing to notice? Are we able to notice when someone is withering? Are we willing to ask ourselves whether our expectations are unrealistic? Are we able to distinguish, and are we willing to learn how to distinguish between difference and deficiency? Because wandering is not the same as being lost. And exhaustion and burnout and how much you can produce is not the same as being unworthy. We are Ohavi Tzedek, lovers of justice. And I'm here to remind you that justice is not a banner, it's not a branding, it's not a slogan. Justice is the slow, sometimes uncomfortable work of listening to lived experience and being willing to change what is not good. Finally, Pirkei Avot reminds us, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chori lihi batel mimena. We are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are we free to desist from it, to ignore it. We may not fix everything. None of us can. But we can ask better questions. We can notice when someone is sitting alone. We can make sure that wherever someone wanders, be it here, be it there, that they are not left to wither. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.